Good evening all, and welcome. Children say the darnest things. Sometimes they can be absolutely horrifying, as we're about to find out. I'd also like to extend a special happy birthday to Michael Perez. I hope you've had a wonderful day. And finally, my brother has just launched a new video about Elizabeth Bathory, aka the Blood Countess. It's a really horrific video. I strongly recommend it to those of you potentially interested. I'll leave a link in the description and we'll talk about it a bit at the end. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Happy birthday, Michael. And let the darkness take control. I know my son has been here before. Everyone who meets him makes the same comment, along the lines of that he knows too much for his age. The first comment was a few months ago, when we were walking the two dogs and he randomly said, "Mum, remember before when I was laying in that field?" And my face was in the mud, and the gunshots were over my head. My feet were so wet. I stopped dead in my tracks. I replied that he had never been round guns, and that he was only 6, so everywhere he goes I'm with him. He was adamant that it had happened, and that he remembered crying and lying there hoping he didn't get shot. I tried to comfort him by saying it was probably a dream, and that if he ever had a nightmare like that, he should wake me up and we could talk about it. He didn't say anything more about it for the remainder of the day. A few days later we were eating dinner, and he said out of nowhere, "I remember when I picked you up by my mum." I asked what he meant, and he said when he was lying in the mud with the gunshots, he doesn't remember anything from that point. He then said he was a baby, and he was sitting on his bedroom floor playing with a toy car, and he heard banging outside the window, but the window had tape all over it. He heard a really, really loud bang, and then that was the end. And he then picked me. I think I'd probably turned a pale shade of grey at this point. However, he didn't seem much distressed. "Perhaps this was a dream," I said. He shook his head and said, almost frustrated, that this was before. I said, "What's before?" And he said, almost as if it was stupid of me not to know, "You know, Mum, before?" I just nodded and agreed, but I was both confused and freaked. I spoke to people about this and they all had the same opinion. This was my son remembering past lives in the war. Obviously I knew what he was getting at, but I was so confused as to why he would know details such as taping windows to stop the glass from shattering back in World War II here in the UK. But this wasn't the end of his before memories. A month or so ago he was sitting with my grandfather, which is his great-grandfather, and he gave him a £5 note as pocket money. My son said thank you and was playing with the note. My son then pointed to a picture on the note and said to my granddad that the picture was of a great Prime Minister. For those of you who aren't from the UK, the £5 note has a picture of Winston Churchill on it. My granddad was extremely taken aback by this and said he was right. My granddad updated me on this when I came back to pick my son up to go home, and asked whether it was something I had told him. I said no, and that it was probably something that he was taught at school. At the next opportunity I asked his teacher whether they were teaching the children about the war or past prime ministers, and she said no, that they wouldn't be learning anything like that until they were at least 9 or 10. Now fast forward to 4 days ago. My son woke up at the usual time in the morning, but he looked exhausted. I asked him if he was okay and he said he didn't sleep well. When I asked why, he replied with, "A man woke me up. He was nudging my arm." I asked whether he knew this man before, and he said, "Yeah, he was from before." By now I understood what he means from before. He said he had a green suit on and some badges on his chest. He was smiling at me, but he was so white. I asked whether it scared him and why he didn't wake me up to tell me. He responded with, "I wasn't scared, he was nice, and I haven't seen him in a long time. We haven't had anything said since. But please give me your opinions. My son isn't distressed by any of this, and he has spoken about past lives before, and we are adamant he is a reincarnation of a friend who died, who we named after him. When my little sister was around 6 years old, she started talking about her imaginary friend named Charlie. She said he would come out of her closet late at night and scare her. My dad and stepmom just chalked it up to her having nightmares. For about 2 years, Charlie would visit her on a nightly basis, tormenting her and scaring her so badly she would always go to my parents' room to sleep. Eventually, she started drawing Charlie and hanging him up on her walls. The picture she drew scared me to death. It was just a dark figure with no features. How could a child think of something like this? My parents started to get very angry with her for waking them up almost every night. They told her to go back to sleep and blame it on nightmares. But one night my parents got a very rude awakening. Around 2 or 3 a.m. my dad woke up to use the bathroom. When he opened the door to the hallway, he was startled and paralyzed with fear to see a very dark figure, featureless, motionless and about 4 feet tall, standing right in front of him. He stood there for a second watching this figure, not knowing what the hell it was. It was Charlie. Charlie ended up literally floating and disappearing into the door to my sister's room. He never again doubted why my sister was so scared of what she saw every night, and we ended up moving a few months later, and my sister, fortunately, has not seen Charlie since. I have always been interested in hearing stories from my childhood. My mother recently told me some stories that weirded me out. When I was 4 years old, my mother was expecting. My parents hadn't told me about it yet. One day, my mum decided to try and tell me that I was about to have a little brother. She was scared to tell me because she thought I would be worried that I would be forgotten about. When she went to tell me, I placed my hand on her stomach and told her she didn't have to tell me because I already knew she was going to have a baby. She was completely shocked, considering no one had told me. Weirdly enough, I already knew. I'm not super religious at all, but I told her that God told me about it. I actually remember some of this next story. I'm not sure how far along she was with the pregnancy. All of my family was in the living room and we were discussing the new baby, names, appearances, and what we thought the gender would be. I said that it would be a boy. He'd be tan, have dark eyes and brown hair. I said he'd look like an Indian. This was funny to them at the time because my family is fair-skinned. Fast forward a few months to when the baby was born. It was a boy and had all the traits that I had described. Me and my brother are pretty close now. I've always felt some sort of attachment to him. I don't know if these are weird to anyone else, but they spook me. I'm very interested in spiritual things and the supernatural, and I'd love to hear any of your comments on this. Was it a premonition? When I was a toddler, I told my mum I wanted the tickle man to stop tickling me at night. She asked me what I meant. I told her a tall man tickles me at night. She kind of brushed it off as a dream. About 2 nights later, she hears me laughing in my room, and she hears me start to cry and say stop. My mum is freaked out. She runs into my room and finds me fast asleep and no one there. My dad worked nights. I have no siblings, and no one would have run away without her noticing since their paths would have crossed in the hallway. This happens again the following night, except my mum doesn't get up. Petrified, she calls out and says, "I don't know who you are or what you want, but you need to leave. He doesn't like it. You're scaring him. Please go away." I immediately stop crying. She goes in to check on me and the room is empty. The tickler never came back. Does anyone know what this could be? I've always been able to interact with the unseen. I first found out I was able to interact with spirits when I was 6. I was attending a funeral and spent the day playing with my cousin. It was his funeral I was attending. Eventually, I bumped into him, and it was as if I bumped into a living person. It was like I could physically touch him. I even fell to the ground. Now, I've heard of people who could see, hear, and sense the spirits, even going as far as to communicate with them pretty regularly. But up until recently, I've never come across anyone that could physically touch them the way I can. Fast forward 18 years. I now have a 4-year-old son, and I'm running a very small spiritual business looking to expand and have grown to a position of some standing within my religion. My son is, and always has been, the light of my life, but I've always wished he had gotten the chance to meet my father, who passed away almost a full year before he was born. Now, onto the experience. I'm sitting in my mother's living room, reading while my son is colouring. Now, like I've said, I've always seen spirits, so needless to say, Dad isn't truly gone for me. I've been able to cope with his passing slowly, since I can still see and communicate with him often. One thing my dad used to do was flick my ear when I was doing something and tuning the world out. As my son was colouring, Dad kept telling me to flick his ear. I'm trying not to respond verbally because it scares Mum, and she hasn't fully coped with my father's passing. And that's when it happened. My son jumps up and stomps his foot on the ground. "No, Papa!" My mum blew a gasket. She goes on a rant at how I passed my curse onto her grandchild and that now he won't have a chance in this world. But I won't go into all of the negativity as it isn't healthy. The thing that got me was that my son knew to call my dad Papa. He's never met my sister's daughter, the only other person who knew to call Dad Papa. So this is 100% proof, to me at least, that my son was legitimately reacting to my father. My mum may be scared and she has her reasons, but I couldn't be more proud and thought that I would just share this with all of you. My mother-in-law was a very funny and cool woman. She and my wife were really close, and sadly she passed away when our son was about 4 months old. Fast forward a few years, we live in an old 1930s era craftsman house in Pasadena, and our son is 3. I was giving him a bath one night, and he starts looking over my shoulder, not at random stuff, but at something. A moment passes and he asks me why Grandma calls Mummy a funny name. Long pause. I asked him what he meant, thinking he was talking about my mum. He then says, "Why does Grandma call Mummy Chi-Chi?" My mother-in-law's nickname for my wife. I was really set back by this. My wife and I never used the nickname. It was just what her mum used to call her since she was a baby. I asked him where he heard that, and his reply was, "The farmer told me." I asked him who the farmer was, and he replied, "His friend." I tell my wife this story later, and she of course is reduced to tears over the whole nickname thing. We both know there's no way for him to know this, and we just kind of marvel at it. Fast forward to the next weekend and my son is playing in his room. My wife is at work, and I am at home. I hear him start talking like he's having a conversation. He's saying things like, "Yes, no, I don't know that." Then some laughing. And I go into his room and ask him what he's doing, and he says, "Playing." "With who?" "The farmer." At this point, I'm thinking about the Exorcist movie and Captain Howdy. It's a little unsettling. I ask him where the farmer is, and he says he left when I came in. Okay, now I'm getting creeped out. So my wife gets home and I tell her this, and now she's as weirded out as I am, and we have no idea what to do and figure if it happens again we'll do something. A few days later, in the middle of the night, we both overhear our son saying the following. "Grandma says you and I can't be friends anymore." Wife and I both go to check on him, both of us a little freaked. He's just sitting up in bed and I ask him if he's okay, and he says, "Yeah, Grandma says I can't play with the farmer anymore." He never once mentioned the farmer again. Not ever. He's 13 now and doesn't remember any of this, but we do. My deceased mother-in-law prevented a full-on exorcist, like the thing in our home. My daughter recently turned 3, and we went up to my in-laws. They live near the border with Poland. We named our daughter after my wife's grandmother, an amazing lady who passed right before we found out about our pregnancy. My daughter's name is Emma Rose, Emma being the first name and Rose being her middle name, which is something unique to our family, as generally speaking Ukrainians don't do middle names. So my grandmother-in-law would have been Baba Emma to my wife growing up, and that's how we have always talked about her and referred to her as Baba Emma. Keep in mind my daughter is old enough to know her own name now, so you say, "Who are you?" or some variation of "What's your name?" and she'll say Emma Rose. After the long 6-hour drive we reach the village. On the way into the village, of course, we passed the cemetery where Baba Emma is buried. This particular time we had my mother-in-law in the car with us, as we picked her up from town on the way to the village. And she's in the back playing with little Emma. Emma is ecstatic, because she hasn't seen her grandma in a while and was really missing her lately. Grandma felt the same about Emma. So we're slowly driving because the roads are terrible, and as we pass the cemetery, Emma Rose breaks away from her grandma, points to the window and says, "Look!" What is it, Emma? What do you see? "It's Emma Rose." "No, you're Emma Rose." "No, there, Emma Rose." Okay, my daughter just saw herself. Alright then. My wife and I look at each other, smirk, and just keep moving. I've read online about many creepy things that toddlers say, but this was the first. I guess it all starts at 3. While getting ready for work this morning, I remembered I needed to go into our attic and count a few things for some renovation work I'm doing in our house. We have a pull-down attic access that's located in the ceiling of our main hallway and is almost directly above the bathroom door. My wife was in the bathroom applying makeup in front of the sink, while my 22-month-old daughter was sitting on the bathroom counter, just 6 inches away from my wife, playing with her toothbrush when I heard my daughter say, "Hi," which I thought she was directing the hi to my wife, which is something she does a lot, so I thought nothing of it. Why she has that face, and she says, "When you got to the attic, Quinn looked up and said hi." When I looked at her to say hi back, I noticed she was looking at the wall that would be directly behind me, and said hi again. Then, slowly, lifted her head up as if she was watching someone walk closer to her, then tucked her arm into her side and giggled. This is what she does when she's protecting herself from tickles. My wife asked my daughter who she was talking to. My daughter didn't say anything back, but just at that moment the plastic makeup container my wife was holding closed as if it was slapped shut. By this time in the story, I had come down from the attic and into the bathroom, not seeing anything happen with my own eyes, but I did hear the conversation my wife and daughter had. This is the first ever experience my wife or I have had since we were living in our house of 4 years, besides some odd giggling and random pointing that my daughter has done throughout the past year. Like I said, nothing wild, but definitely made an impact on my wife, who isn't an "I believe in ghosts" type of person, and usually calls bull on any of the stories. We'll have to see what happens next. Our son knew all sorts of oddball things for his age. At 3, he asked grown-up questions, like asking his doctor how he could build an otoscope because he might be able to see people's thoughts with it. And this farmer's thing was just odd beyond belief. One day I saw him walking around with his hands out talking to it. I asked him what he was doing, and he said something about carrying the farmer because he was tired. He once mentioned my wife's dead uncle, who died in Vietnam, to my wife in passing. He just said, Do you know Uncle Andrew died and got a medal? Just things he wouldn't know. My wife also never really talked about her uncle because she never really knew him and her dad never brought it up. All in, this farmer nonsense went on for many weeks on and off, and it was very creepy. The first paranormal thing I ever experienced started when I was 2.5, just before Christmas of 1990, and ended 1.5 years later on my 4th birthday. Some of the stories involved in these events I have been told back to me by my own family, but the memories that are truly vivid I know only to be mine, since I was the only person who could actually see the 2 ghosts. At the time of this, I lived with my father's mother. My parents lived with us too, but worked so much I hardly ever saw them except at bedtime, if they made it. I spent most of my time playing by myself in a large playroom. The room was empty mostly, with a few toys here and there scattered about. No rug, no carpet, no furniture, just one big window. I was facing the snow out the window as I used my wooden blocks to construct a towering, structurally dangerous ziggurat of primary colors when I suddenly wasn't building it alone. On the other side of the tower sat a girl of around 16 with strawberry blonde hair and 2 plaits, a ton of freckles and pale skin, wearing denim overalls and a faded t-shirt striped in yellow and green. She looked solid to me, but glowed from the inside out, white brightness. It didn't even seem odd that she was there at the time. I didn't even speak to her during this visit. When I spotted her, we smiled at each other. When she was done helping me with my creation, she was gone. But it wasn't the last time I'd see her. She became a frequent companion when I was left alone to play. I learned her name was Sharon. She said that she was there to watch me, so I called her my babysitter. I talked to her about my family and they all thought she was an imaginary friend. Despite her wild glow, she was the first ghost-type person I'd ever met, so I didn't realize that she wasn't just another human. I introduced her to my mom one weekend and my mother explained that she couldn't see Sharon at all, and I said, "But she's right here," and Sharon said I was the only person who could see her. Things were nice for a long time. That summer, spring, and most of the following fall were lovely. Finally, I had a day-to-day companion willing to tolerate any silly things I felt like doing. Once, she stopped me from drowning in the creek behind the house. I didn't tell my parents that they had pointed out multiple times that they didn't think she should be real. They wouldn't understand. The following Halloween, I met another being. She never told me her name, but Sharon called her the Vexo Lady. She was a tall, beautiful woman of about 50, beautiful and cold. Her eyes were an unnaturally bright blue. She wore bright red lipstick and had short, white hair. She wore a tightly and fairly short, black cocktail dress with long sleeves and no shoulders, and tall black heels. She glowed in a similar way to Sharon, but while Sharon was like the bright warmth of a midday sun in summer, the lady was like the sun glinting off ice in the winter, a sharp and unpleasant blinding glare. I knew from the moment we met that I could never trust a word she said. She was nice in the ways adults are fakely nice to children that they think are stupid. Everything about her felt dangerous and cutting. We met after I went to bed that Halloween. She came into my room like I'd kept her waiting for an appointment and told me that she had some place she wanted to show me. Someplace beautiful. A huge meadow full of soft grass and sweet flowers, full of children, special children like me. I told her I couldn't go because it was time for me to go to bed. She was annoyed, but I rolled over and stared at the wall and ignored her with all my might, as she stalked around and huffed and clicked her shoes. Eventually I fell asleep, and she wasn't there when I woke up the next morning. After this I started seeing more and more ghosts. A little boy in the house, an old man in the woods, strange figures everywhere we went. I told my parents about all of this, and along with some other stories as well. Things like floating down a staircase, finding human bones in the backyard and communicating with a weird doll that's been in our family for a while. My parents, as they told me many years later, were getting freaked the hell out. The weirdest part that they explained was that a 3-year-old shouldn't know the word vex meant bother, and the Vexo lady was called that because she always bothered me and Sharon. They had no clue where I'd learnt it, and said that it was the beginning of them convincing them something odd was happening. This all kept up until the night before my 4th birthday. I slept in a small nursery off my parents' bedroom. I was awoken in the middle of the night by the lady. She dragged me out of bed by pulling on my right arm, pulling me through my parents' bedroom and into their closet. In the wall of their closet was what I can only call a portal. It glowed blue and white around the edges of a rectangle like a welding flame. Through this strange window was a world she had described: blue sky, white clouds, lush grass, flowers almost glowing, and children running around. She said it was time for me to go. She stepped through. The colors on the other side looked far too wrong, too bright and too fake. More than my eyes could handle. My arm went through behind her as she gripped my wrist, and I planted my feet against the wall and struggled to get free. I was in up to the elbow when a pair of arms grabbed me from behind. It was Sharon. She yanked me hard and we thudded hard onto the floor of the closet. The portal cracked and closed with the lady on the other side. Sharon cuddled me in her lap, petting my long hair and hugging me close, telling me it would be all right now. She hadn't gotten me, and she couldn't. It was late, 6:30 in the morning, and I was born at 6:30. The invisible deadline she was so annoyed to be working against had passed. My parents opened the closet doors, and my mum later told me it looked like I was hovering off the floor for a moment. They couldn't see Sharon, but I was in her lap. She picked me up, as they had heard a loud thud when Sharon and I hit the floor, as it had awoken them. Sharon then waved goodbye and faded into the morning sun. I never saw her nor the lady again. This occurrence was pretty much the last straw for my parents and the driving reason for us moving out of my grandmother's house. 2 months later. It didn't help the new house was also dreadfully haunted. Keep in mind that all of this is pieced together with my now 33-year-old vocabulary and information my parents gave me after, like, "Hey, do you guys remember the Vexo lady?" when I was in my late teens. But even with every other strange thing I've since experienced in my life, this was my longest lasting, most consistent haunting, even though I've never been sure they were ghosts. I'm pretty sure Sharon was my guardian angel, and I think the lady wanted to steal me because of my unnatural sensitivity as relatives to the paranormal. It was weird, and it was more weird because of how solidly I still recall these meetings. I had never met my grandpa, considering the fact that he had died from a heart attack 2 or 3 years before I was born, but that didn't mean I couldn't speak to him. When I was younger, I was always on the move. When we finally settled in an apartment in West Texas, weird things began to happen. My theory is that me and my grandfather used to be friends through the paranormal. The first red flag for my parents was when they would always find me in front of my closet, seemingly talking to no one. "Who are you talking to?" they always said, assuming I had an imaginary friend. Each time in the most casual voice, I always said, "Grandpa." After that started happening, things began getting even weirder. One night at 5 p.m, my parents heard me crying. Obviously they rushed to where I was, and to their surprise, I was on the top shelf of the closet in the hallway. That closet had broken and rusted doors that were really hard to open for an adult, so how could a 2-year-old open them, much less climb that high? It had always puzzled my entire family. They for some reason had a weird idea. They thought I would be able to see my grandfather's grave for the first time, and if they did that, maybe the weird things would stop. But it got even weirder from there. When they finally took me to the cemetery, which I had never been to, I sprinted to my grandfather's grave as if I knew exactly where it was, and had done it multiple times. I looked at them with a smile on my face, as casual as ever, and said, "Here's Grandpa." How did I get on the top shelf? How did I know where his grave was? I guess they always say, children can see what we can't. The first time I saw her, as she followed me since I was a kid, was about 5th grade. Now I'm in my 20s. I've always seen spirits or other things ever since I can remember. I've tried to look at both sides of the scientific and spiritual, and try to argue both aspects with myself, and tend to not share much info to people in fear of sounding like a wacko. I've told my sister, brother, and best friend. My buddy saw ghosts with me and now believes in ghosts, but doesn't talk to me about it anymore. I think I shook his view on the world. When I was in 5th grade, I had a friend over to stay the night and hang out. The standard sleepover when you're a kid. So we're being annoying young boys all jacked up on sugar and pop, playing the old Xbox and GameCube. Many memories there. It gets to about midnight, and we had these PVC pipe-like giant connects. I don't know if anyone remembers those, but we used to build some weird fort structures in the basement with them. My friend and I then heard my 2 cats hissing and just going nuts. So I told my friend that it was just probably raccoons or something that was pissing them off. It wasn't the first time, you see. So we run up the stairs to see if they were at the back door, and the cats weren't there. Then we walk up to the front door, and the cats are at the base of the stairs to the 2nd level, puffed and hissing. We both look up to the top of the stairs, and we both see a girl standing there with a blue hue and white clothes and dark hair. I'm assuming she's roughly our age, just standing there holding onto the railing looking down. So we ran back downstairs after looking at her a little, and we locked ourselves in the basement. My friend never came over again. Many friends refused to stay at my house claiming it was haunted, and I was labelled as the weird kid in school and no one wanted to be my friend. I've seen her for a long time, and she follows me when I move, even 150 miles. Then I moved across the country, and when I was on danger a few times. If people have theories, I'm all ears. I'm not scared to see her again, and I wish I had the video evidence to prove it. Anyway, any discussions or theories would be helpful. I'd appreciate the insight. My family owns a whole building in Poland. My great-grandfather bought the building for cents when times were harsh, and shortly before the Second World War started, so it's pretty old. This happened around 1998. I was 2 at the time, and I was a pretty lonely child, although I had an older brother. He didn't really like me because I didn't share his interest in soccer at the time. My father was an arse and wasn't around much, and my mum had her own store next to our home, and she didn't have much time either. I used to pass hours in my room just playing alone with my Lego. The babysitter was in the next room doing her own thing, and I remember one day while playing alone, there was a kid sitting on the other side of the Lego pile who was dressed strangely and was quiet, but I didn't mind. I finally had some company. I don't know why I didn't tell the mum or babysitter. Maybe it's because I didn't want to get into trouble. Well, there I was playing with the kid, talking to him and asking him to pass me certain Lego bits that were on his side of the pile. This was going on for the next 2 years until we moved to another apartment because of a flood affecting us. Fast forward to when I was 16, I went to see my grandfather. He was my great-grandfather's son, the one who bought the building. We got on the topic of the building complex and all the legal parts, etc., as during the last 50 years, the situation of who owned what part got pretty complicated. My grandfather went for an old file book with documents and pictures and started showing it to me and my brother. As we were going through the pictures, I pointed to a family picture. I pointed to a kid and said, "Hey, I know him." My grandfather stopped and looked at me surprised. "You know him?" "Yeah, I used to play with him when I was small." Now he looked even more shocked. "How was it possible you were playing with him if he died during the war when the Nazis entered the building and killed all the Jewish families?" I then noticed the Star of David on the kid's chest, and it hit me afterwards that I was playing with a long-gone child. I started talking to him and then my mum, and both told me it's common for people in my family to have certain abilities and be able to communicate with those that are past. I tried to call him the last time I was there, but either he's gone or doesn't want to show up. I'm thinking about buying a set of Legos and starting to play next time I'm there, just to see if I can see him one last time. Right before I was born, my parents bought and moved into a house of an older couple that had just passed away. After I was born, my parents said a lot of freaky stuff started happening, hearing footsteps upstairs, doors and drawers open then slamming, and a lot more, but they weren't really sure it was an issue. When I was 3, my parents said I would open the basement door every night and start waving to the bottom of the stairs, telling them I was waving to the boy in the basement. Around this time, my aunt came to visit one night alone and immediately told my parents that there were unsettled spirits in the house, and she opted to do a ritual to cleanse out the spirits, which entailed her burning herbs around and speaking to the spirits. Right after she did that, she said she saw a white flash in our living room. Following that, my parents said all the noises in our house had stopped, and I never waved to the basement again. A week or so later, my aunt told my mum that she thought the spirits followed her home, which my mum thought was bogus until she mentioned that my cousin had started waving to a boy in their basement, which, at that point, my mum told her for the first time that I had been doing that too. My aunt wasn't aware of this, and my cousin hadn't even seen me doing this, so it wasn't like he was copying me. It still kinda spooks me out thinking that we basically accidentally verified that there was a spirit in our house, and that it migrated over. Bear in mind this isn't a first-hand experience, as it was told to me by my mum. My mum had me at 19. She was a single mum with a rough upbringing, and as such, I didn't spend a lot of time with anyone. I was often home alone as she was working. Her parents had decided to disown her when they found out she was pregnant. Charming. I still don't know my grandparents. One day, I'm just in the apartment. I'm about 3, I'm playing, and my mum said she wouldn't be gone long. She was nipping to the supermarket for some bits. I'm playing with my toys when I hear something and turn around. There I see a woman in a green dress, wearing funny-shaped earrings. I give her a puzzled look, but ignore it as I'm used to adults being around the house. She comes down and sits and starts playing with me without saying a word. We were putting together some toys in a formation, soldiers or something like that. And then out of nowhere she's gone. When my mum gets home, I ask her who the lady in the green dress was because I really liked it. She said she didn't know and asked if I'd turned on the TV, to which I say no. Well, a few weeks later, after not bringing it up again, I see the green lady, but this time my mum is working in the kitchen. I tell my mum that I see the green lady and want her to tell me who she is, but my mum walks in and sees no one. At this point, the green lady has all but vanished, and I am left confused, wondering why my mum can't see someone who is so very tangible to me. The third and final time I saw her was at night. I remember this was the only time I heard her. I was tossing and turning in my bed. I wasn't a good sleeper and was finding it very hard to fall asleep, when I hear someone whisper, "Good night," into my ear. I turn around, but there's no one there, and I scream. I'm convinced it was the green lady, but I'll never know. I tell my mum, And shortly after that, we leave the apartment, and I never saw anything again, at least according to my mum. I know the paranormal stuff freaks her out, so she might have only chosen to tell me this, and not anything that happened after. But I will never know. In any case, she was really scared, my mum, just telling me these stories. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you've enjoyed tonight's video. Like I said at the start, it would mean a lot if you would check out my brother's channel. He does historical stuff, historical figures, and it's going to be quite an interesting channel. So if you want to see his latest video, it's in the description, and it's on screen soon, and I would really appreciate it. Thanks guys, really. Sorry for being late as well. Pandora had some trouble falling asleep, and then she woke up sooner than expected. In any case, if you liked it, please let me know. And thank you to all the wonderful patrons who really help support the channel, and all the members who have recently joined. Thanks guys. But for now, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.